We're going to do an experiment today. We're going to have a clip shown on the TV. So, let me move this out of the way for those over on this side. Can you see it? Everyone over?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. A little introduction. I'll explain what you're going to see. And then if you have trouble hearing or anything, don't worry, I'm going to go over it again. Some of the words that were used, just to make sure everyone understands what was going on. And this leads into the sermon. So let's keep our fingers crossed and hope this all works. This is from a show called Firefly. And Firefly is a science fiction show, but that's really irrelevant to the purpose of the clip. Boy, people are excited. Brown coats unite, right? Okay. In this clip, you're going to see two characters. One is called Shepherd Book. He is a minister, and probably one of the best minister characters on American television, presented quite well. He's talking to a young lady named River Tam. Shepherd has a dark past. We don't really know what it is, but now he is a minister. It's kept somewhat vague, but we do know that the Bible is his scripture. River Tam has been the subject of experiments by the government. They're trying to turn her into a weapon, essentially a assassin and something else, and they rescued her, and so they're on the run. They did things with her brain, so she's not quite right, but she's hyper intelligent. So we're going to see how these two interact when they discuss faith.
What are we up to, sweetheart?
Fixing your Bible.
What?
Bible's broken. Contradictions, false logistics. Doesn't make sense.
No, you can't.
So we'll integrate non-progressional evolution theory with God's creation of Eden. The 11 inherent metaphoric parallels already there. 11. Important number, prime number. 1 goes into the house of 11 times, but always comes out 1. Noah's Ark is a problem. We'll have to call it early quantum state phenomenon. Only way to fit 5 dozen species of mammal on the same boat.
Maybe you don't fix the Bible.
It's broken. It doesn't make sense.
It's not about making sense. It's about believing in something. And letting that belief be real enough to change your life. It's about faith. You don't fix faith, River. It fixes you. You hang on to those then.
We need a lighter podium.
Stronger minister.
Our new president. Bring it on. If you weren't... Oh yeah, now I lose. If you weren't able to follow all of that, River is wrestling with some of the issues in the Bible that so many people do. In fact, she tries to interpret it using new scientific understanding. She says, we'll integrate non-progressional evolutionary theory with God's creation of Eden. 11 inherent metaphoric parallels already there. 11, important number, prime number. 1 goes into the house of 11 times, but always comes out 1. Noah's Ark is a problem. So here we have it, that age-old conflict of reason and faith. River can only see factual errors and contradictions in the Bible, and Shepherd Book couldn't care less about the problems. He knows they're there, but he wants to believe in something, believe so fully that it changes his life. In his mind, faith fixes us. Now, this is not going to be a talk about whether we're more River or more Book, although that would certainly be a nice line of preaching. And I found out in my research that many ministers have referenced the character Shepherd Book and clips from Firefly talked about them because they have some very intelligent discussions on this show about the nature of faith and religion. And let's go back to his last line. It's about beliefs. Instead of faith, I'm going to use the word beliefs. So I'll change it slightly. Beliefs change our lives. This is going to be an underlying theme today as we talk. Easter has arrived, and some may be wondering if I was going to mention it, since I started with a clip from Firefly, and that certainly has absolutely nothing to do with Easter. In fact, last night, I actually saw a post from one of my fellow seminary classmates who had just been asked very recently, like a couple days ago, to fill in and do a sermon. And she was asking for some ideas, what are you all doing to talk for your talk or your sermon on Easter? And I said, well, and she wanted to know what Bible theme to use. And I said, I really don't normally do Easter sermons. In fact, I'm going to be talking about Firefly, and started giving her some quotes from it. And I said, I realize this doesn't help you whatsoever, but it's fun. And so a couple of us got on and we started talking about quotes from Firefly. So there is a lot of love out there amongst the minister community. Again, perhaps because, at least on American television, you have some actual intelligent discussion without making caricatures of people on one side or the other. They're all treated with respect and they interact with respect. So, coming back to Easter, the traditional thing, as I mentioned, was you talk about resurrection. Sometimes you talk about the end of winter, the new birth of new life, both in the animal kingdom and in the plant world. It's a time for egg hunts and bunnies and cute little animals. It's a time of positive energy and hopeful thoughts. And in the words of Alfred Lord Tennyson, in the spring a young man's fancy lightly turns to thoughts of love. So spring is a time of positive thought. You don't normally encounter negative discussions about spring or about Easter, unless you're an allergy sufferer, but we're not talking about the sniffles today. And that's just the cost you have to pay for those beautiful blossoms. But in the spirit of new life, rebirth, warmth, the explosion of color, I want to explore this idea within your life, and I want to explore it with the idea of a personal manifesto as a form of rebirth and renewal. I want to talk about how beliefs change us. And these beliefs aren't all going to be the same, but they have great power. So whether we call it faith or reason, conscience or intellect, knowledge or belief, we all have something, or many somethings, that matter deeply to us. Something that molds and shapes how we live. Some face the troubles of this world through faith, a willing focus on a particular religion, or a scripture, or a person, a teacher, or a leader, that inspires them to live in a certain way. Others may find direction in analytical thought and deliberate reason. Some combine the two. People can be completely devoted both to political ideologies as well as religious ideologies, and sometimes people combine those two together. But it seems like there's a universal desire for all of us to find something that we can pin our hopes on, something that we can build our lives around, something that gives us a center, a great sense of purpose. It's strong in our lives. In this clip that I showed you, the regular viewers know that the shepherd has had a darker past. He can still act in a very unshepherd-like way, and willingly points out that he wasn't born a shepherd. So if the need arises, he can wield a gun just like anyone else. Faith did, however, save him, as it saves many. Not all people, of course. I don't know how many. I don't know how you count up how many are saved by faith, how many are saved by reason. There's no way to know that exact number, but there's no question it's an important aspect of human existence. I even had a friend once who told me that even though she was born a Christian into a Christian household, and that had always been important to her, she fully acknowledged that she was a person centered on faith. And had she been born in a Buddhist culture, she would be just as devoted a Buddhist or a Muslim or whatever, because it was the idea of how you were raised, that cultural influence, religious influence, and the faith that comes from within grabs onto those things and builds on that, and that gives the life meaning and center. fully acknowledging that even though Christianity was her way, other ways were important to other people, and would be to her had she been born in a different location. Now, last time I spoke, I mentioned a friend of mine who used the phrase, wouldn't it be great if when we got together as ministers, we could all acknowledge that all theology is speculation. Now, since that time, I've spoken to him again, and I said I didn't want to share his name because I didn't want to get him in trouble, but he said, Doug, if I can't say that and not get in trouble, I'm in the wrong line of work. So I said, I'm going to make you famous. I'm going to use your name. His name is Craig Toth, a good friend of mine who's a United Methodist minister in North Carolina. And we've been friends since high school. And we had another long talk about this. And he says that, he doesn't know if it's his original wording or he may have picked it up somewhere. But this also had a strong impact on me. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. But that was almost like something that jarred something loose inside my head, because lots of loose things rolling around in there. But when he said that, something clicked, something lifted. But I'll save that for later. I wanted to acknowledge him, though, because I always like to give credit where credit is due. But let's play with this idea a little bit and say, instead of belief saving us, or faith saving us, maybe if we simply acknowledge that speculation can save us, or make us better, or help us to live more fully. You can put in any word you like that you're comfortable with, that helps you. And you can say it many ways, but at some point, we pick a path and we follow that path. Now, we may switch paths at some point. We may come to many forks in our life. But at some point, we pick a path and we do it by faith, or by reason, or by speculation, or by belief. We use something inside of us, deep inside of us, to decide which way to go. Otherwise, we would never progress. The problem is, we don't want our speculations to become the only truth. And this is true across the board for everyone. Conservatives and liberals, Christians and atheists. We do not want our speculative truth, our belief, to become mandatory for everyone else, to be the only possible way, the only true way. That's the danger of this, and that's what we should avoid. When faith becomes certainty, discord ensues, and sadly, sometimes death ensues and wars. And we definitely want to avoid that. It is far better to admit that we act less from certainty and more from inner convictions. And these inner convictions in turn come from, I'm going to leave you to answer that because it's different for each person. So this is how we function, how we make these crucial decisions, but how often do we do it deliberately? I suggest you take some time over the next week. You might want to write them down or at least think about them. Come up with a short list of the things that drive you, that motivate you. The beliefs, the faith, the speculation that helps you to be who you are and helps you to live a life, hopefully, of compassion, of caring, a life, for lack of a better word, that is better than it was in the past, one that continues to improve. And I call this creating a personal manifesto, which is an inward, and perhaps outward, if you ever choose to share it, declaration of intentions, objectives, opinions, and motives. And I've been looking long and hard at my paths in my life, and I've had many of them, and they've been winding with many forks. And I thought, after all of this, it was time to actually sit down and write some down. I've never actually done that. It's all up here, but I sat down and wrote them down. Some things that are speculative, are matters of belief or faith, but are of ultimate importance to me. And I do this to share, as Emerson says, from the life experience, rather than sharing from mere scriptures or dry doctrine, but rather a life lived. So I came up with 5. These aren't necessarily comprehensive, but hopefully they'll give you some ideas, and hopefully you'll go through this exercise also. First of all, I believe we need to think more in general than we do on what we are as individuals. You can call it the self, the personality. There's many different beliefs on this. Religions approach it dramatically differently. But the very first thing I think we all need to do is take a good hard look at what it means to be you. In my case, what is Doug Traversa? Am I something separate from my mere physical body and the functions of my brain? Is there more or not? And to think on this at great length, this is what the Buddhists do, to understand self, to separate this idea of a single entity separate from the universe and understand your connection to everything else. I cannot even begin to go into this in any depth. I'm only just beginning to scratch the slightest surface on this, but I think it's a path worth going down. Number two, I believe ultimately we all follow our conscience. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what are we doing day to day to develop that conscience, to build it up and feed it? How do we nourish it? In my previous talk, I mentioned Ralph Waldo Emerson's beliefs that God is in each one of us. When we hear God's voice, we are listening to our conscience. And Emerson said that was the original message of Jesus in Christianity, which has been lost over time. And that finally moral direction must come from within. You have that capability because God lives within you. If you will listen, you will find the right path. You will make the right choices. So this is one way of looking at the human conscience. God in us seeking to lead us to correct choices. Others find this to be a product of natural evolution. But in either case, I think we can cultivate our conscience, largely by what it is we take in. What do you read? What do you listen to? Who do you spend time with? What is it that you're reinforcing within your conscience? The Apostle Paul put it this way in Philippians 4:8. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. That's one way of reinforcing your conscience. What do you take in? Number three, I believe that we should tread lightly upon the earth, seeking to do as little harm as possible, both to creatures and to the environment. As the Buddhists teach, we should seek to minimize suffering and discontent. And this is not only within ourselves, but within the life around us. We should carefully consider the impacts our actions have on others. Number four, I believe we should constantly expose ourselves. Oh, losing the speaker again. I believe we should constantly expose ourselves to new ideas, even ideas we think we might disagree with. Keep your mind out of ruts. Always consider the possibility you might be wrong, and listen to other perspectives, even radically different perspectives. As an example, to show I'm not merely telling you to do something that I never do, over the last month, I have read books by a Baptist, an agnostic, a practitioner of magic, and am currently reading 2 books by Buddhists. There, as you might imagine, are quite a lot of contradictory ideas from those different sources. I do this because I think it's important not to fall into a rut and always read things that only reinforce what I think. There's a lot of good ideas out there from a lot of different sources. Expose yourself to them. Finally, number 5, I believe that it's important that our beliefs continue to be open to change, that they can evolve, and that there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, there's something good in it. As we acquire more information, more experiences, and more insight, we should change. Sometimes this idea of change is considered dangerous, or it's considered the mark of someone who's really not very serious. Instead of diving into one thing and just taking it seriously over and over, they're looked at, well, someone who's just flitting from idea to idea and never really getting into in-depth study of anything. Sometimes it's dismissed as dining at a religious buffet where people just go along with their plate and pick a little bit here and a little bit there and never really dig into the main course of any one religion or one thought. In the book Restless Souls by Lee Schmidt, which talks about the evolution of spirituality in America, we read, "Was Emerson's growing alienation from the church a sign of freedom? of liberation of the spirit from stunting institutions, authorities, and rights? Or was it an indication of self-reliance gone awry, a spiritual seeking that went everywhere and arrived nowhere? Think about that. Spiritual seeking that goes everywhere and arrives nowhere. That's the criticism. If you're constantly looking at different things, then you never settle on one. So there will always be that criticism, I suppose. Those who say, nah, you're missing the point entirely. Pick one, stick with it, study it in depth, give it your total and complete concentration and devotion. And perhaps for some, this is the best approach, but I don't think so. That's my belief, my speculation, that we should expose ourselves constantly to different inputs and different ideas. Doing this, of course, has its own dangers, to be sure, so it needs to be done carefully, and it needs to be done wisely, but I do think it's important. So that's my manifesto, and you'll note that these are my beliefs. I can't prove any of them scientifically, objectively, nor do I want to. That's not what I'm trying to do. I don't insist that anyone else share them. They are mine, arrived at over many years, owing thanks to many different sources and many different people. But these beliefs are very important to me, and for some reason, the phrase, all theology is speculation, had a, liberating effect on me. It's almost as if a fog lifted from my eyes and I see things a bit clearer. Now, intellectually, I always understood that. And I'm not going to be able to put this very well into words. But having had that discussion with my friend seemed like some kind of a tipping point in my brain where suddenly I could take things a little easier, a little less stress on me maybe. We've had a really tough winter with Jancy's folks, her poor mother, wrestling with Alzheimer's and moving them out here. And sometimes in my mind, I was getting in that rut. That, there are certain paths that are right, and the other paths are wrong. And I was starting to get a little calcified around the heart, maybe, to use a metaphor. But all of this is speculation, and that's okay. We all speculate. We speculate with great import, however. Do not underestimate the importance of that word speculation. Whether it leads to faith or belief, conviction, reason, whatever it is, that is the source. And that's a good thing. And it's a good thing we don't hear nearly enough about. If all the ministers came together in a group from all over different religions and all over different faiths, and they all agreed right up front, it is speculation. And my speculation could be wrong, and yours might be right. And parts of both might be good. And it's going to be different for different people. Instead of going in and drawing the battle lines and saying, well, this is acceptable and this is not, it might be a much better world. And it would certainly put a lot less stress on relations. So, this whole idea of the importance of speculation, that might be a sermon down the road. I'm still wrestling with this almost insight that hit me somehow, and it's hard to explain. But what I want to do now, to tie this all up, this idea of thinking about the things that matter to you, is close with one final quote from Firefly. This time the captain, Mal, is talking to the shepherd. And Mal says, "Oh, hell, shepherd, I ain't looking for help from on high. That's a long wait for a train don't come." And Shepherd Book says, "Why, when I talk about belief, do you always assume I'm talking about God?" Belief is a powerful motivational force, but the objects of our belief can vary. Some will focus on God, and some on others, on people. Some will focus inwards, seeking enlightenment or inner revelation. Wherever you focus, I urge you to give close and continual thought to the things that you believe. For through this process comes the strength to change how you live and perhaps to change the very core of who you are. Through this comes the strength to make a positive impact on the world. Our congregation exists to help each one of us in this process. And if we ever lose sight of that, I think we have failed in our purpose and lost sight of a most precious goal. It is my most fervent hope that this never happens. Rather, as we will do in our discussion afterwards today, I hope we will always help each other towards the betterment of ourselves, toward a serious search for truth and meaning. And because this process is enriched by the participation of many, I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for being here each and every Sunday as you do. I thank you for coming, for listening, and for staying afterwards to have the discussions which most people really think are the highlight of the Sunday, where we share our ideas, and hopefully those new ideas help us as we seek to find the things that we believe. Thank you so much for coming.